Hello everyone, and welcome to the next in-depth retrospective here on OAM. Now, in accordance with the last poll, we will be looking at the 1999 sci-fi anime, Blue Gender. Now, Blue Gender is the first series on this channel that we've reviewed that I had no idea existed prior to establishing this channel, and I appreciate all who mentioned it, as the discovery of obscure pieces is really the driving factor behind this channel. It was also a very interesting journey, and one I consider an excellent reflection on the era that was the late 90s and early 2000s of anime production. It was a time of flux for the medium, as it slowly became mainstream and gained more traction and respect in American audiences. As such, Blue Gender served as both a sort of pioneer for later anime and a reflection for some of the issues present with adaptations at that time. These issues range from questionable dubbing at times, to slight mistranslations, to various waves of censorship from almost original to almost for kids level, to suit quote-unquote different types of Western audiences. As a result, I should mention that Blue Gender does have several versions of it, with differing degrees of changes and stuff, though I think the one I watched was somewhere in the middle. There was some blood, there was a few suggestive scenes, but it wasn't crazy, or at least as crazy as I've heard other versions described. Anyways, all this of course spawns from the American studios not only trying to make content more family-friendly, but generally more American or familiar. While it's now generally preferred and agreed that adaptations should be as literal or accurate as possible to the source material, in the 90s it was feared that this would keep source material too alien and thus inaccessible. Over time, this has resulted in numerous dub flubs of the 90s, ranging from the classic donuts of the original Pokemon dubs, to the odd names of directly translated Keto in some early Bleach episodes, and of course, the classic gem of an oddly translated English cover to the Japanese opening song, complete with clunky wording and meter, as seen in Blue Gender. Now, none of this really impacts how I feel about the series, though I just thought it was all interesting to see all of this, and really set the stage for where this production fits into our real-life timeline. As for Blue Gender itself, the series is one which I found very interesting, if a tad flawed here and there. There are a few writing issues, a few weird decisions that I'll mention later, but I still found it very enjoyable, and it never comes off as incompetent. As in 90s mech anime, I don't actually know why it isn't more remembered, or popular, or influential, as this was kind of the heyday of mech, which is still very popular today. Though if I had to guess, I would chalk up its relatively lackluster success to questionable adaptation decisions, combined with odd broadcasting hours, the presence of many other mech anime series at the same time, and the derisive title of being an Evangelion clone. While I do not hear this label attached to it often, it does appear in some times and in a few of the sources that I looked over for research purposes, and while I see why some might consider it at least partially inspired by Evangelion, it's not a note-for-note copy. I won't go too much into any of that here. There will be a full video for that. It's perfectly fine to like both, and that while Blue Gender might remind you of Eva at times, it's definitely not. It has its own story and lore, and while swaths of the cast can be compared to one another to some extent, they're not note-for-note copies. There is a through line between the two, and one can see differences between both, in addition to some similarities between both. Blue Gender is worth a watch of its own, simply if you enjoy anime. Should you enjoy mech combat and analysis and commentary on the human reaction to high-stress scenarios, this is a good show for you, as it combines all of this with a good, relatively action-y plot. But what is this high-stress scenario of Blue Gender? In the case of Blue Gender, this is the near annihilation of mankind by giant bugs known as the Blue, who can and do cause massive devastation and nearly render humans extinct, and that gets us to the plot summary. Now, the plot of Blue Gender follows Yuji Kaido, a sleeper, who joins with the humans in space, most of them live in space now, to kill off the Blue and reclaim the Earth. Episode 1 opens with an extraction team wheeling Yuji's sleep pod, a cryotube he was placed in for 20 years due to an incurable disease known as B-cells, out of the hospital, only to be ambushed by a Blue. This fight wakes Yuji up, though he is saved in time by the mech pilot Marlene. She reveals that Second Earth, the satellite orbiting Earth where everyone now lives, wants sleeper specimens, and therefore Yuji must come with them. She also takes him to meet the rest of the extraction team, which, after being denied pickup at several rendezvous points, must go to several other backup points. Along the way, the team is continuously attacked by the Blue, and Yuji goes from fearful and spiteful towards his rescuers to sympathetic, and even volunteers to fight with them for the good of humanity. As such, Yuji becomes a soldier along the way to the shuttle back to Second Earth. He doesn't lose his humanity though, and his compassionate and sometimes illogical actions eventually help Marlene rediscover her own humanity. Yuji proves to be capable, and eventually he and Marlene do make it back into space. Their long and gruesome ordeal getting there, though, has created a strong bond between the two, and the once cold and distant Marlene now finds herself in love with Yuji. This bond is put to the test when Yuji is stabbed by a blue on the shuttle back to Second Earth. While Yuji is rushed to the medical station, Marlene is berated for her quote mission failure, even though none of it was her fault. As such, the council decides that Marlene should be slated for retraining and re-education, which she doesn't seem to mind even though she was yelled at for something that wasn't her fault. She struggles in this training though, as having now rediscovered human empathy, she can no longer excel as the brutal and heartless person she once was. She's even punished for trying to rescue comrades in combat simulations. In addition, her curiosity about Yuji's fate as a, quote, sleeper specimen doesn't go away, and since she doesn't find him in the medical station, she becomes quite concerned about him. As such, she goes rogue, breaks into numerous offices, and breaks numerous laws, and even takes scientific director Miyagi hostage, all in order to find out where Yuji is and what his fate will be. She does eventually get to Yuji though, whom she finds in an odd mech, and as she now finds herself surrounded and desperate, the ruling council of Second Earth eventually step in to resolve her little mutiny by being honest with her for once. They tell her that the disease that led to sleepers being frozen, their B cells, can now be harnessed in order to turn them into super soldiers in order to beat back the blue. Yuji is to become one of these super soldiers and join the sleeper brigade. While Marlene fears for him, Yuji says it's okay by him on the condition that Marlene is assigned as his partner. The council scoffs at this notion, though Miyagi steps in to say that the bond the two share could help, actually, and that Marlene should be allowed to accompany Yuji, even if she is not a sleeper. The council reluctantly acquiesces, and the two join the sleeper brigade, along with Alicia Whistle, Tony Frost, Rick Kilmer, and a few other characters. This brigade is soon deployed in various drop missions to destroy blue nests and other targets of interest on Earth. During these missions, Marlene notices how the once friendly and compassionate Yuji has transformed into a bloodthirsty monster, now only obsessed with killing the blue and surpassing Tony, who also proves to be kind of a weirdo. This worries Marlene, of course, who reports all of this odd behavior to director Miyagi. Miyagi then reveals that the missions are stimulating Yuji's B cells too much, and as a result he's becoming bloodthirsty, just like the blue. In fact, he reveals that if all of this goes on too long, Yuji will in fact become more blue than human, because the blues are actually just concentrations of near-pure B cells. He says only Marlene's bond with Yuji can pull him back from the brink at this point, and that's why he wanted her to be his partner. The council of course ignores the possible blowback of sleepers going rogue and sends them off to the next mission anyways, although Marlene is detained by some of Miyagi's underlings so that she can help him launch a coup. She agrees to do so as she wants to rescue Yuji from himself and his own B cells. This occurs while the sleepers are on a mission, and it sees Miyagi push the High Council out of the military station and force them into the medical station. Meanwhile, after Marlene helps the coup succeed, she later goes down to rescue Yuji. She narrowly succeeds in getting through to him, although puts her life at great risk in the process and is even shot by a bloodthirsty Yuji, who is now racked with guilt for nearly permanently becoming a merciless killer and feeling guilt about his lack of remorse during that time. Still in love, the two then head back to Second Earth, only to find out that Tony has already returned with Alicia and the two have gone rogue, seeking to kill everyone. While Miyagi sees this and denies entrance to the main military station to Tony, the council, again holed up in the medical station, don't see any issues with Tony coming back early or unexpected and just let him in without question. Tony does this and unleashes a horde of blue upon the station. Apparently, they now listen to him and Alicia as they recognize their shared B cells. These blue kill off most of the station staff and the council. Before Tony can kill everyone, though, by colliding the medical station with the military station, Yuji, Marlene, Rick, and a few others successfully land in the medical station, rescue some of those in stasis there, kill Tony, and blow it up. Before dying, though, Tony reveals why he did this. Here he reveals that since he has B cells, and the blue have B cells, and the blue hate humans, then he should hate humans. He explains that B cells and the blue themselves were created by the Earth itself as a living organism. He says that humans have infested Earth, and that the B cells are manifestations of Earth's will to lower the human population for its own sake. Essentially, the Earth is killing off humanity because humanity is being too harsh to the Earth. As someone who is both blue and capable of reasoning, Tony therefore reasons he is the, quote, messiah of the new era, and that it is Earth's will that he, Tony, destroy humanity. This reveal of course shocks everyone, and Yuji is now seen as something of a dangerous figure due to his own B-cell and sleeper status. The survivors next regroup onto the Second Earth military station, and Miyagi, as the new leader of humanity, proclaims a new era of peace, saying that the Blue won, and now all resources should be focused on making a Second Earth a permanent home, as opposed to continuing a seemingly unwinnable war. Cut 3 months later, Yuji, now again ostracized for having B-cells, decides to launch an investigation into a recent mass migration of Blue to a massive nest in South America. Marlene, now fully committed to him of course, accompanies him. In South America, they find almost no Blue, and just a peaceful human village in the middle of the jungle. Upon actually going into the nest, they discover that it is actually an amalgamation of Blue corpses, and that it appears that they have basically come here to die. Marlene hypothesizes that by wiping out most humans, the Blue in turn became the overpopulators, and thus were wiped out by the Earth itself for having served their purpose. Next, an earthquake strikes, and several members of the team fall into a massive cavern, home to the vicious Mega Blue, and a sort of world flower. Now the Blue does kill everyone except Marlene and Yuji, although they defeat it, and Yuji reasons he needs to investigate the world flower alone. As such, she instructs Marlene to wait above ground, which she does, and steps inside the flower. Inside, he realizes that the Earth's will has been done, and it's for the more or less part completely reborn. Thus, the Blue are in fact slated to essentially self-destruct, and that remaining humans can lay down the foundations of a more environmentally conscious and compassionate civilization. The series ends with those who stayed on Second Earth going mad, killing director Miyagi, and running away, some to Earth, and those now on Earth, and those who were on Earth the whole time, now committed to laying down the foundations of a new and more nature-conscious society, living with nature as opposed to against it. It sees Yuji and Marlene now confident that they can have a beautiful life in the Earth and with each other. With all this explained, I think that Blue Gender is definitely a worthy watch. Oh, and before anyone asks, I'm not quite sure why it's called Blue Gender. I couldn't really find any answers online, even after scouring some poorly translated pages of Japanese Wikipedia. The blue part makes sense. The gender part, I don't really understand. But anyways, while the writing and pacing does suffer at times, the story is cohesive and quite gripping. It does make for quite an engaging watch, and the Blue are fun and gross bugs, for lack of a better term. I actually really like how Blue Gender doesn't follow the conventional format for this kind of anime. As you see, through the first half of the series, Yuji's really built up as a protagonist and powerful warrior. He does a lot of cool stuff and sees a lot of combat. He proves himself quite skilled. Then, in the second half of the series, conventional formats would see him become the chosen pilot, and along with the elite sleeper force, liberate the Earth in a series of insane and probably unrealistic action sequences. This doesn't happen though, and in fact for most of the series, Yuji is actually quite powerless and cannot realistically save the day even with the sleeper brigade. It establishes a realistic and grounded nature to the situation present, and it shows that it is unrealistic to expect that all the work of liberating Earth be done by a select group of people, no matter how elite they are. Instead, it's shown that this is extremely dangerous work, and cannot really be done alone, or even with a sleeper brigade, as after all, there's only about 10 people in the brigade, even if we count non-sleepers. It serves as a good inversion of the conventional anime formula, where instead of everything going the protagonist's way and their growth exceeding all realistic expectations to solve the problem in an unrealistic manner, we instead see a realistic portrayal of odds that cannot necessarily be overcome and how people deal with them. This shifts the focus from idealized, bold, and embellished actions to gritty, messy, and tough struggles for survival. Those who don't realize the limitations present throw themselves against a metaphorical wall, while those who do plan around this and realize the limitations present decide instead to wait for a better chance to try and move on. As a result, the solution doesn't come through some great character action or unrealistic over-the-top action sequence which somehow solves everything, but instead through perseverance and patience in letting the Earth reset itself naturally. Now, it could be argued that this is a kind of a cop-out, since they basically just wait the problem out, though I do think this is more realistic, and that it therefore is a good fit for the more grounded nature of the series. I have no issue with it therefore, and honestly kinda like the idea as it again inverts the focus from bold action to realistic and gritty perseverance, showing that even in cases where humanity can't necessarily do something, it's still strong, and it can survive, which in and of itself is doing something. Another odd decision to speak of is Blue Gender the Warrior. Now, I didn't really know where to put this, so I'm just going to dedicate a quick minute to it. Blue Gender the Warrior is the kind of Blue Gender movie. However, it's not a sequel, it's not an additional, material kind of thing. It's just a clip show that consists of about the first 2/3 of the movie to try and tell the story in a very condensed hour and a half. Now, I have mixed feelings about this for a couple reasons. On one hand, you could argue that a clip show is kind of lazy, seeing as that it does just recycle clips from the first 2/3 of the series. Although I do appreciate that they do a very good job of choosing clips, and the compilation's quite well made, with some scenes even reanimated. On the other hand, you can't get past the fact that they only used the first 2/3 of the series, and therefore they had to come up with a new ending on the fly. Now, in this new ending, instead of Yuji going to South America and realizing that the Earth has reset itself, instead he kind of just wakes up his blue powers during the raid on New York, and the blue, while encroaching upon him, back off at the last minute, and the camera kind of just cuts, and nothing is really resolved. I don't know why they went with this, although if I had to guess, I would say it was probably due to some kind of budget issues. The fact that it's a clip show already hints at that. It is a good way to speedrun the first half of the series if you don't want to watch like the first 12 episodes, as it does a pretty good job explaining stuff, getting right to the point, and establishing some good bonds. Although the ending is kind of out of nowhere, if it could even be called an ending, and I don't necessarily hold it in high regard. It's a harmless add-on, but I wouldn't say that you have to watch it to truly get the real Blue Gender experience. Going back to some of the issues with Blue Gender, or some of the odd quirks that I noticed. While the writing does suffer some pacing issues at times, and there are a few questionable decisions here or there, the story is cohesive and gripping enough to make for an engaging watch. And, to be fair, I find that some of the issues with the series are fascinating to me in their own right, as it leads me to question some of the behind-the-scenes processes. These aforementioned issues are mostly related to the writing and result in a lack of subtlety in some areas, and some bizarre tonal inferences in places. Most notably of these is how sudden and bluntly Yuji becomes like evil Yuji. There's not so much a sudden fall from grace as a headfirst leap into insanity, although the concept of him becoming consumed by his hate and aggression of an enemy is a timeless and sound one, as is him being rescued by the woman he loves, through their loving bond. This of course means that Marlene's growth and presence are also a massive strength of the series, and it's fun to see her go from a heartless statue to a loving and compassionate partner, all the while remaining as strong as ever. Now, the romance aspect of Blue Gender is definitely not what I expected when I read the description of mech pilots versus giant bugs, but I will admit I do find it interesting. In fact, I kinda love the idea of a romance story occurring in such a high-stakes environment, as it shows the true strength of the bonds present, the humanity of the pair, and even raises the stakes a little higher. As for the odd tonal inferences, there are a few times where the show seems to want to imply something, even though it's been thoroughly proven otherwise by that point. We see this most with Miyagi, who is implied to be sinister much after he's done nothing but help his society and definitely has no ill will towards any of the main cast, but for some reason is portrayed as ominous after that point. It's odd. On the topic of Miyagi, though, I find him to be the highlight of the supporting cast. The cast which we see forced to wit's end as they struggle not only to overcome the blue, but themselves. Another key theme of Blue Gender is not only humanity's struggle with its environment and exterior factors, but its struggle with itself and interior factors, and this really adds a very impressive and interesting dynamic to the series. Some characters exhibit very negative aspects of humanity, some aspect very positive aspects of humanity, and many manifest both. While it is a mech anime, like many other notable mech anime, it's a very human story at its core, and the humanity is on full display here, as we see the true strength of the human soul pitted against the near impossible odds of the Earth itself turning against it. It's very fascinating seeing how different characters deal with this, and ultimately how they overcome the struggles placed in front of them. For this reason, I think most mech, if not most anime fans in general, would enjoy this interesting and hidden piece. So please, thank you for watching this video, and join me on future episodes of this retrospective as we take a more in-depth look at some of the settings, themes, and characters of Blue Gender, a very interesting, obscure anime memory.